Hi, friends. I'm Pastor Ed, and welcome to this week's Sunday School lesson based on last week's sermon, Beyond Our Current Reality. And before we dive in, let me say a quick word about last Sunday's message. A couple of you mentioned my reference to SNAP benefits and the government shutdown. Well, it was only 2 people. It sounded like 20. In today's political climate, it's easy to hear commentary and immediately paint it red or blue. And that wasn't my intent. It was a pastoral and prophetic witness, not a political one. And here's what I meant. When leaders in Washington are focused on scoring points, sometimes real people, even their own constituents, go hungry. 18% of families in Louisiana rely on SNAP benefits, and that's the second highest rate in the country. When the government shuts down, those families lose access to food. The church can't sit on the sidelines while people go hungry. Scripture says in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 17, learn to do good, seek justice, rescue the oppressed, defend the orphan, plead for the widow. And that's what it means to live beyond our current reality, to see to the world through the lens of compassion and act accordingly. And friends, that's what I've seen in you. I've seen that compassion. On Sunday evening, during our Beyond Steering Team meeting, a man came in to the fellowship hall holding food and a blanket from the blessing box. Amy greeted him warmly. His name is Taj, as in the Taj Mahal. After hearing Taj's story, we gave him cash and filled his gas tank. On Monday night, the missions committee helped a church family with groceries that she could choose herself. And on Tuesday, with Good Samaritan Ministries, we helped a family of 6 with rent assistance. And that's what it looks like when the church moves beyond words and moves into grace. While our current reality may be political divisiveness and gridlock, Stokesdale UMC is looking beyond our current reality with grace and love. Paul saw that same spirit in the Macedonian church. In 2 Corinthians 8, verses 1 through 5, Paul writes, out of the Macedonian severe trial, their overflowing joy and extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. These were people just like you and me, ordinary believers living under hardship. Yet their joy overflowed in generosity. They gave, as Paul says, beyond their means. When I studied this passage during my doctoral work, I was struck by how familiar the world of the early church feels. Economic equality, social divides, people struggling to survive. It could be first century Corinth, or it could be 21st century America. And yet Paul points to these Macedonians as people who didn't let hardship define them. They trusted that God's grace was bigger than their scarcity. Fred Craddock once said, money for the relief of the poor is as spiritual as prayer. We often separate spiritual things like prayer or worship from practical things like helping others. But in God's eyes, they're one and the same. Generosity is worship. It's saying, everything I have comes from you, and Lord, I trust you with it. The theologian Miroslav Volf wrote, the poorest of the poor acted not simply as recipients, but as subjects of charitable help. What he meant was that even those who had nothing still gave. They didn't wait to be rescued. They became rescuers. They didn't see themselves as charity cases, but as partners in grace. That's the miracle of the church. Generosity isn't reserved for the wealthy. It's the birthright of every believer who knows the generosity of God. That's why Paul's teaching is prophetic. He's not trying to start an argument. He's trying to start a movement of grace. Being political means taking sides. Being prophetic means standing in the gap, calling people to justice, mercy, and love, no matter who's in power. Yes, our current reality might be divided and anxious, but our calling is beyond that reality. Through the Blessing Box, through Missions Committee, through Good Samaritan Ministries, Stokesdale UMC has been a living sermon of generosity. Paul challenged us to move from means-based giving, what can I afford, to value-based giving, meaning what do I believe in? When our generosity flows from gratitude, it becomes worship. On Sunday night after our Beyond meeting, Taj and I were filling up his gas tank at the Citgo station, and he asked me, "What was your sermon about?" And I chuckled and I said, "Oh, actually, generosity." That generosity is not measured by how much money you give away, and before I finished, he smiled and said, "It's about how you touch people's lives." We prayed right there at the gas pump, thanking God for the grace that fills us so we can overflow joy into others. That's what it means to live beyond our current reality. So as you discuss this week's lesson, think about this. When have you seen generosity change a situation? What does it mean for you to give beyond what feels possible? And how can we as a church continue to be a prophetic voice of compassion right here in Stokesdale? Friends, Beyond isn't just a campaign. It's a way of life. It's trusting that God can do immeasurably more through us than we can imagine. Thank you for being a church that listens deeply, gives freely, and loves boldly. Grace and peace to you, and I'll see you next Sunday.